The throne world of Zithra hung beneath a dead sun. Its skies were the color of bruised metal. Its towers formed from living chitin that pulsed faintly with breath-like motion. Inside the palace, silence reigned, a heavy, absolute silence born not of peace but of fear. Every corridor shimmered with the residue of psychic command. To look toward the throne unbidden was treason. To speak before the queen's armor was sacrilege. The throne itself was carved from the remains of an extinct leviathan, and on it rested the empress of the brood, V'Adrath Kai. To her species she was divine geometry given flesh. But to every lesser being she was terror sculpted into elegance. Her crown was not metal, but the hardened crest of her own skull. Beneath it, her eyes glowed like molten crystal. Yet all reverence in that chamber bent not to her face, but to what encased her, the armor. It was older than the brood empire, woven of living alloys that whispered softly when touched by air. The armor seemed to breathe. Faint lights crawled across its surface like constellations. Historians claimed it was grown from the seed of a fallen star. Priests called it the skin of dominion, but none knew its origin. The queen believed it was destiny made tangible, her birthright and her proof of divine appointment. She had worn it in 1,000 conquests, and no weapon had ever breached it. When she stood, her soldiers fell to their knees, not from order but reflex. The armor radiated power that their minds could barely bear. Yet beneath its perfect sheen, something unseen trembled, a microscopic imperfection, a human fingerprint of oil invisible to the alien eye, laid there only hours before. In the bowels of the citadel, far below the ceremonial chambers, a human named Elias Ward scrubbed the residue of engine coolant from his hands. He worked in the biomechanical pits where alien technology fused with muscle and sinew. The brood had conquered Earth generations ago. Humanity now served as laborers and test subjects scattered across the empire. Elias was one forgotten, useful enough to keep alive, expendable enough to ignore. He had learned to survive by learning their machines. He did not speak their language aloud, but he understood it through motion and rhythm. The throb of conduits, the hiss of organic vents, the pulse that told him when a living circuit was dying. Machines and bodies were not so different. Both could be coaxed, repaired, deceived. When the queen's armor arrived in the pits for recalibration, he had not been told what it was. He only saw another complex organism, beautiful, intricate, humming with latent will. Its caretakers had fled when its system spiked into violent feedback. None dared touch it again. The overseer had dragged Elias forward with a lash of command, ordering him to stabilize it or die with it. He touched it. To his eyes the surface rippled like water. It was cold, impossibly smooth, yet beneath that smoothness he felt something shiver, a consciousness, faint but watching. He placed his palm against the joint of its breastplate, where the energy lines crossed. For a heartbeat the armor's glow dimmed. Then it stilled, balanced, quiet. The alien overseer recorded the readings, stunned that the energy had stabilized. Elias withdrew his hand, unaware that a trace of human bio-oil had bonded to the armor's self-cleaning membrane. He only knew he was still alive. He was escorted back to the slave quarters, chains clinking, mind replaying the moment. Something in that contact had felt familiar, as though the metal had recognized him. Above, in the queen's private sanctum, the armor reassembled around her for ceremonial renewal. As it closed over her form, sensors screamed. The palace lights flickered. The throne world itself seemed to recoil. The psychic network of the brood registered a disturbance from their empress, a ripple that toppled kneeling attendants. The queen froze. She felt it instantly, a foreign vibration beneath the living metal, an echo that was not hers. Her armor, the sacred skin that obeyed only her neural pattern, shuddered. For the first time in an age, it resisted. Her mind lashed outward. Who has touched me? The question was not spoken. It erupted across every mind within reach. Scientists collapsed. Guards bled from their eyes. The psychic roar tore through the hive communication web and echoed across orbiting stations. Entire squads fell to their knees, clutching their skulls. The queen rose slowly from the throne, the armor pulsing like a heart under strain. Her attendants groveled. None dared answer. The roar intensified. Who touched my armor? Deep beneath the palace, every slave heard it without sound. The words appeared inside skulls like thunder trapped in bone. Elias froze mid-step as the vibration pierced him. He knew that resonance, the same he had felt when his hand lay on that alien surface. The armor remembered him, and now its mistress demanded an answer. He could have stayed silent. No one in those tunnels would ever expose him. Humans were invisible here. Yet the Queen's voice pressed into his thoughts with unbearable weight, forcing even the bravest to the ground. Somewhere inside that pressure, a small part of him refused to bow. He wiped the sweat from his brow, stared at his trembling hands, and whispered to no one, "It was me." The words were quiet, but the psychic network caught them like a spark in dry grass. Overseers stormed the tunnels within minutes, scanning minds for guilt. Each interrogation ended with screams. Elias watched them drag his fellow workers away, one by one, until his conscience fractured. He stepped forward when the next squad arrived. "Stop," he said in broken alien tongue, a language never meant for a human throat. "You searched wrong one." "I did it." The soldiers hesitated, their mandibles clicking in disbelief. The smallest of them transmitted the confession upward. Moments later the order returned. "Bring him. Alive." They shackled him in chains that bit like living worms and led him through corridors where the walls watched. When the doors of the throne chamber opened, the air itself seemed heavier. Elias entered and looked up. The Queen towered above him, encased in that impossible armor now glowing with sullen crimson. Around her the courtiers knelt, their antennae pressed flat in submission. She regarded the human with the cold precision of a scientist examining an anomaly. He was smaller than her leg armor, skin pale beneath grime, eyes steady despite exhaustion. The silence stretched. Then her voice filled the chamber, not psychic now, but audible, distorted through the armor's resonance. "You," she said, tasting the human syllable as if it were poison. "You touched what no mortal may touch. Do you understand what you have done?" Elias's throat tightened, but he met her gaze. "I fixed it," he said simply. The hall erupted in outrage. Guards raised their weapons. Priests hissed invocations. But the Queen raised one clawed hand, and the noise died. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for deception, and found none. Her armor pulsed again, once, softly, like a heartbeat answering his words. The Queen felt it, and for the briefest instant, fear brushed her ancient mind. The pulse within the Queen's armor faded, but its echo remained, a soft vibration under her skin that did not belong to her. VH Wrath Kai had never known hesitation. Her mind was a fortress built on centuries of conquest. Yet now that fortress had a hairline crack. The human stood motionless before her, small and fragile, in the armor. The divine second skin that had chosen her had answered him. Her court waited for the explosion of rage that usually followed any act of defiance. Instead, the Queen studied the human in silence. Around them the throne hall quivered in psychic suspense. The courtiers could not comprehend the delay. The priests whispered theories, that the armor was purging corruption, that the human had cursed it. But the Queen heard another whisper, one that came from within the living plates around her ribs, something that sounded almost like curiosity. She ordered that the human be taken to the vaults below the palace, not to the execution chambers. No one dared question. The guard obeyed, hauling Elias Ward through corridors of breathing stone until they reached a room so deep that even the hive-mind connection grew faint. Chains bound him to an observation dais, surrounded by translucent membranes pulsing with light. Alien biologists, gray-skinned eyeless, their thoughts shared through electric scent, began their examination. The Queen herself descended hours later, silent as falling ash. She dismissed the scientist with a gesture. Only the human and the Empress remained. He expected death. Instead, she circled him slowly, every step accompanied by the faint whisper of the armor sliding over itself. "You are the one," she said, her voice a low resonance that shook the air. "The armor remembers you." Elias swallowed. "It remembers what was made for," he replied, though his voice was hoarse. The Queen tilted her head, the gesture both regal and alien. "And what was that?" "To protect," he said, "not to serve." The chamber's lights dimmed as if the armor itself were listening. The Queen's expression remained unreadable. She reached out, one clawed gauntlet touching the barrier that separated them. The armor flared briefly. An acknowledgement. The human's heart pounded. Somewhere deep within the living metal, something pulsed in rhythm with it. That night she ordered every record concerning the armor's discovery to be brought before her. Ancient tablets carved into crystalline bone, holograms etched with indecipherable glyphs, relics of the Empire's prehistory, all laid before the throne. For days she read without rest. Her attendants found her motionless, her gaze locked on a single symbol repeated across the relics, a mark identical to the pattern of the human's fingerprint that now glowed faintly on her breastplate. The priest insisted it was coincidence, a meaningless resonance. The queen said nothing. She summoned the human again. When he entered, unshackled this time, he saw the relics scattered around her. "You understand these?" she asked. "Some of them," he answered. "They're written in old Terran code, a design language." "Explain." He hesitated, then pointed to one line of glyphs. "This sequence, Waridin 9, that's a model series. Military interface bioshells, self-learning armor, human technology from before the collapse." The queen's mandibles twitched, a movement of disbelief. "You claim your kind created this?" Elias met her eyes. "We created a lot of things we couldn't control. Maybe your ancestors found what we left behind." For a long time she said nothing. Then she turned away, and the armor rippled, shedding fragments of its sheen like falling dust. In the drifting particles, Elias saw shapes, cities, stars, battles. Images burned into the armor's memory. "Show me," she commanded. The plates on her arm unfolded, exposing an interface node alive with light. "Touch it again." He hesitated only a moment before placing his palm on the living metal. The room dissolved into vision. They stood, bodies frozen, minds transported, inside a memory older than her empire. Giants in human form walked across a barren world, forging armor from the shells of artificial organisms. The air thundered with engines. A voice echoed, deep and human. "Project Origin complete. Humanity endures through the Maker's skin." The vision shattered. The queen staggered back, gasping as though breathing for the first time. The armor's lights danced frantically, aligning to the human's proximity. She dismissed him without another word, but that night no one in the palace slept. The Empress of the Brood paced her chamber, feeling the armor shift like a restless animal. When she tried to connect with the Hive network, she found interference, ghost signals repeating in human cadence. The armor was talking to itself in a forgotten tongue. By dawn she gave a new order. The human was not to be killed, not even touched. He was to be studied, questioned, preserved. The priests protested. The generals objected. She silenced them with one glance. "The armor has chosen to remember," she said, "until I know why he lives." In the days that followed, the queen's visits to the vault became frequent. Sometimes she asked questions. Other times she simply watched the human tinker with fragments of alien tech. The conversations were brief but charged. She asked, "Why did your species fall?" He answered, "Because we believe we were finished evolving." She asked, "Why do you defy me?" He answered, "Because obedience isn't the same as peace." Each exchange left the armor trembling faintly. The scientists observing through psychic screens recorded data spikes unlike anything seen before. They whispered that the queen was changing, that her aura, once purely predatory, now flickered with something dangerously close to empathy. On the 10th day, the armor itself reached out, a thin filament of living metal extended toward the human, like a tentative hand. The guards raised weapons, but the queen motioned them down. The filament touched Elias's wrist. The air filled with a low hum. Symbols scrolled across every wall of the chamber, language from a dead epic reawakening through living circuits. The queen's translator struggled to decode it. The closest approximation was a greeting. "Welcome back, Maker." The words rippled through the Hive network like a forbidden prayer. Across the Empire, sleepers stirred. Machines dormant for millennia flickered to life, muttering in the same forgotten code. In that moment, the queen understood that her armor was not divine but designed, that she was not destiny's chosen, merely its custodian. Rage battled revelation within her. She wanted to destroy the human, to erase the proof. Yet she could not. The armor itself would not allow it. Instead, she demanded another demonstration. "Wear this fragment," she said, detaching a gauntlet section and handing it to him. The soldiers flinched. No one but she had ever worn any part of it and lived. Elias slid the gauntlet over his arm. The metal flowed around his skin like quicksilver, adjusting to his biology, fitting perfectly. The chamber filled with a deep tone, harmonious and alive. Every sensor in the palace registered synchronization, human and armor becoming one frequency. The queen stepped closer. "How?" Elias looked down at the glowing lines tracing his veins. "Because it remembers what we are," he said quietly. The armor responded with a soft pulse that mirrored his heartbeat. For a moment, Queen Vivrath felt something she had never known. All that was not rooted in fear. Years had passed since Elias Ward first touched the armor. Yet the resonance of that single act had grown into a tremor that shook the very foundation of the Brood Empire. Across the countless worlds bound beneath the Queen's dominion, whispers of a human who had survived her wrath had become legend, not the kind born from fear alone, but one that spread hope like a wildfire across the hearts of the subjugated. Every slave, every dissident, every observer of the Empire had begun to speak his name in hushed tones. The Maker. The Queen remained on her throne, yet she was no longer untouched by doubt. The armor had shifted under her command, subtle but undeniable. Where once it had responded solely to her will, now it pulsed faintly, calling to the human who had awakened it. Her generals called it rebellion. Her priests called it blasphemy. And yet she called it revelation. She did not know whether to destroy him or embrace the truth he carried. Meanwhile, Elias had traveled through the Empire. He did not lead armies, did not claim titles. He moved as a catalyst, awakening hidden relics, forgotten machines, and dormant fleets long buried beneath alien cities. The armor, partially integrated into his being, guided him, responding only to his commands and to the silent legacy of humanity encoded within its memory. With every activation, the echoes of the Maker's old empire, its ingenuity, its brilliance, resonated across the Brood worlds. Machines that had lain dormant for centuries now pulsed with life, casting long shadows across the alien metropolises. The slaves began to rise, not as soldiers, but as witnesses to the impossible. They watched as fortresses long thought impregnable were bypassed without bloodshed, as the Queen's own surveillance systems recognized their human creator and faltered. When they told each other what they had seen, the myth of Elias Ward grew faster than any empire could contain. Across the hive mind network, signals became garbled, messages twisted, and uncertainty seeped into every council chamber. The Queen's palace, once the heart of absolute authority, now became a chamber of questions. Every day she walked its corridors, armor glowing with restrained energy, her mind played by the memory of that first human touch. She summoned philosophers and generals, demanding answers that none could provide. "Why does it obey him?" she asked. No one spoke. She had the armor studied endlessly, and the more she learned, the more she realized the truth. This was not merely a tool of war, but a sentient archive of an older civilization, a record of a species long thought extinct. Humanity had not disappeared. It had merely left behind instruments that waited for its return. Elias Ward had been the first to awaken them. Across the Empire, anomalies multiplied. Starships buried beneath planetary crusts ignited with silent power, their cores synchronized with the human's presence. Laboratories that had lain in use for generations produced technologies that mimicked human ingenuity. The Brood did not understand the patterns. They had lost the language of the Makers. But their soldiers and scientists began to falter, recognizing the alien imprint of human cognition without comprehending it. The Queen's generals urged action. "Strike him down before he awakens more," they said. "Eradicate the human or the Empire falls." She listened, and for the first time she hesitated. The armor itself pulsed against her chest, a silent counsel. Its light was not violent. It was contemplative. She realized that destroying him would not end the awakening. It would only delay the inevitable. What had once been subservience had become a memory, a code embedded into the Empire itself, and humans were the key. Elias moved through the halls of lost cities, activating the final systems of the Maker's legacy. With each gesture, the Empire's structure began to unravel, not through violence, but through recognition. Alien minds remembered the gifts they had stolen, the knowledge they had feared, and the truth forced itself through every mind. The Queen watched these events unfold from her throne, feeling the Empire's pulse change under her feet. When Elias finally approached her palace, he did not come as a conqueror. There were no armies behind him, no fleets to bomb or invade. The armor glowed softly around him, the fragment of human ingenuity still alive after centuries. The Queen descended from her dais to meet him, her presence imposing yet tempered with the knowledge that she now faced something far larger than her own dominion. "You return," she said, voice carrying the resonance of countless stars. "I have never left," he replied. His tone was calm, deliberate, unshakable. "Your empire exists because it borrowed from ours. Now remembers." She examined him closely. The armor wrapped partially around his arm. Still alive, still responding to him alone. "Do you intend to overthrow me?" "No," he said. "I intend only to remind you." The Queen understood instantly. The Empire would not fall through war, because this was not war, it was revelation. Humans had left pieces of themselves behind in every corner of the galaxy, and now those pieces were awakening, guided by the touch of a single maker. Entire fleets, once dormant, answered the call. Entire cities reactivated with systems designed for humans. The brood could no longer maintain control, for the truth had begun to speak for itself. The Queen's mandibles twitched, a subtle gesture of contemplation. She realized that she could attempt to resist, to cling to power through fear, or she could accept the new paradigm and allow the Empire to evolve. The armor pulsed, its light washing over her like a tide, aligning itself with Elias, reminding her of the ancient connection between human and machine. In the days that followed, the hive network of the brood experienced a transformation. The signals of rebellion were not violent, but cognitive. Alien leaders began to question directives, scholars questioned doctrine, and soldiers refused orders that violated instinctive patterns encoded by humanity itself. Rumors spread of a human who touched the divine armor and commanded obedience through memory rather than terror. Elias moved through this changing empire with quiet authority. Every world he visited awakened another fragment of the Maker's legacy: starships, weapon systems, archives of knowledge. He did not seek tribute, nor did he demand allegiance. His presence alone was enough to catalyze recognition. Humankind, once thought broken and erased, was remembered through him. When the Queen finally confronted him within the central chamber of her palace, she realized that she was no longer the arbiter of destiny. The armor had chosen, the legacy had awakened, and the Empire was no longer hers command in the old ways. "What are you?" she demanded, eyes narrowing as she measured the calm certainty of a human. "I am human," he said simply, "and through me we endure." The palace thrummed with the awakening of every artifact, every machine, every memory the brood had inherited and feared. The armor, once an instrument of singular dominance, now recognized him as its true bearer. The Queen felt the full weight of centuries pressing upon her. Every plan, every conquest, every triumph of her reign now seemed small before the sweep of a legacy she could neither erase nor fully comprehend. In that moment, the Empire did not collapse in fire or blood. It transformed,